Hi there crafters, this is Becca with Amazing Paper Grace, and today I'm going to show you how to make perfect ink bordered die cuts. Now this technique has been around for quite some time and I've used it quite often. I used it on my blog on this card this week, and a lot of you asked me how I got those perfect borders. So obviously they're inked and it's done with the aid of a die template. So there are a couple of different ways to do this technique. I've modified it so that I do mine a little bit differently, but I'll show you how I do it and then I'll explain how others do it, and I'll let you see how it works best for your workflow. So let's get started. I start out with a cut die. Now this works for basic dies very well. Something intricate you wouldn't want to use this particular method, but for shapes, labels, and that sort of thing, this works out for me very well. So I start out by cutting the die, and then I remove the paper from the die. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my ink. Now, the ink that you're going to use is pretty important. It has to be a wet ink, and it has to be an ink that's going to stay wet for a little while you're working. So the type of ink that lends itself best to this technique is pigment ink, some hybrid inks, and some chalk inks. For my advice for you is to try it out on a piece of paper using a specific type of ink before you commit to it. That way you're going to know. And then once you know that that particular ink works, then you'll be successful in using it from then on out. So for this particular ink, I'm lucky because I have the re-inker, even though I've not had to re-ink this pad. So I usually take my die template and I press the template down into the ink. Now there are others that do this differently. There are some people who place the die face up and then ink down on top of it on a sheet of scratch paper. But I find that this technique works best for me because I can target the area. I'm not using all of my ink pad, and I can get that die down into the ink so that it gets into the nooks and crannies. So with this, just continue to ink it, you know, flipping it over to see what kind of progress you're making, and then just continue along. I am just about done there. I've got one more side that I want a little bit more ink. I think we're pretty much done. So I'm going to remove the ink, and I'm going to bring in a piece of wax paper, and I'm going to lay my die down on the wax paper. And now I'm going to bring back in the piece of paper I had. Now it needs to be put back in the die exactly how I got it out. So I'm just going to reseat this like so. And I know it's down in there. And then I'm going to cover it with another piece of wax paper. That's just going to protect my tan mat. Then I'm going to add my tan mat and my embossing plate, and I'm off to the die machine. I'll see you in a moment. Okay, I'm back after having run my sandwich of my base plate, my tan mat, and my embossing plate through the die cutter with ink on the die and my die cut reseat back into the die. So just remove those, get rid of my wax paper. Pull the die out and wash the die template, and that's what you have. Okay, so the other way that you can do this is by starting out with a piece of wax paper in your die template, and then you can go ahead and by turning your stamp pad upside down, you can go ahead and ink the die template. this is the method that a lot of other people use. I just feel like I have more control if I do it my way. So once the die template is inked, you simply remove it and put it on another sheet of paper or wax paper, like so. Then you would go ahead and you would cover this up with your piece of paper, like so. And you would finish your sandwich by putting on your cutting mat and then off to the die cutting machine. Okay, once you've run that through, then it's time for embossing. And so you can actually leave that right in place and go ahead with your tan mat and put your embossing mat, and then again off to the die cut machine. Okay, so now using a whole sheet of paper and going through with die cutting and then embossing, I have just finished embossing using my base plate, my tan mat, and my embossing plate. And you actually get a little bit of a border around the negative that is created when you die cut. And then I'll pop my die out and I'll have pretty much the same exact thing as the first way that I showed you. So you know, just with your workflow, just look at the results from both and then figure out which way you actually like it. So that's perfect ink bordered die cuts for your cards. I hope you're able to use that technique and enjoy. I'll see you soon.